Hey Ed, good morning. Uh, you may be on mute still.
I was on mute. Sorry.
There
Good
you
morning. How are you
go.
doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Just fine.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to kind of be able to have more of a water cooler talk, certainly around some concepts on implementation and kind of deployment of Power BI. So I think this is going to be a really fun conversation today for sure.
Good. Hope so. Hope we'll be able to learn a little bit from it.
Yeah, for a bit of background from the people in the channel, Ed's another MVP like myself. He now works for, now P3 Adaptive Power Pivot Pro, a company that I used to work for quite a few years ago. And I
Mhm.
think you've been there for 6 months.
Uh, yeah, going on six, about 5 months. Yeah, so almost half a year.
Nice. Do you want to give like a little background about yourself, kind of where you came from, what are you passionate about?
Yeah, so my information's on the screen, but my background is I am a CPA by trade, so that was my education. That's what I did the first few years of my career. Um, but I found out early on I was much more interested when it came to doing things like budgeting and things of that nature because I really got into data. And so back in the day, it was Excel and Microsoft Access.
Hmm?
So I've always been kind of a data nerd. Really enjoyed playing with that kind of stuff. And once Power Pivot and then Power BI came out, that's really has become my passion over the last few years. So that's that's my background, and now I'm doing it full time. I left my full time job as a controller, a financial controller, and I'm did a little bit of consulting on my own, but I'm with P3 now, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I know they've grown quite a bit in the last couple of years.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, for sure, and rebranded to the P3 Adaptive, which I think was a nice forward change for them. At some point, I still hope
yeah.
to get Rob on one of these live streams when he can find time out of his busy day.
Yeah, he's busy doing all the podcasts for
Exactly, yeah.
P3, so that's almost a full time job now.
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, back in the day, like, I cut my teeth writing blogs for them and, eventually switched over to, doing video, which I just find is a much more preferred medium for me. But at this point now, like, it feels like second nature. But it's been a while, a couple of years now, since I've actually written like a legit old school blog.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I haven't ventured into the video yet. I still do a blog, not heavily. I post about 12 times a year, but I haven't done the video thing yet for myself. I don't know. I'll think about it. It's a lot more
it,
involvement.
it's true. I have found that at least for a lot of tutorials, the medium of following along for I feel like for the majority of people, it's easier to track versus like a bunch of screenshots. And then if you accidentally miss a step in between, you go from A to F and like, wait, where was the in between parts of that? But it's hard to miss
Right.
those when you at least you do a video. So that's one of the reasons that I
Right.
switched over.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Oh, actually, I realized though you had the slide on your own personal stuff, so I could actually flip over to that if you wanted to mention anything else uh, on your background. Otherwise, it's on the slide screen now.
Yeah, no, so that's basically it. And I think the key part is if anybody wants to get in touch with me, my Twitter handle there, ehansalytics, at the
Hmm.
bottom is probably the easiest way, especially for people watching this. I think most people probably have a Twitter account. Um, but at the very end, my email address will be there should anybody want to connect to me that way. But Twitter is, I'm pretty active on Twitter. So that's the
Yep,
best way.
definitely. But yeah, as far as like kind of the flow and everything today, overall, I'm imagining some natural conversations and just some really fun things about implementation and deployment. But yeah, if you want to go over a little bit of the agenda.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to talk a little bit about was, just what, who is your Power BI team? Because I think a lot of people assume that the report author is the Power BI team. And that just simply is not true. There's so many other people in the organization, even people that don't do Power BI reports would be part of the team in some way. And so I just wanted to have kind of a conversation about how that works, who those people are. It helps get buy in with other people in the organization, and then it increases adoption. So I could flip forward here. Let's take a look and see, as I said, report designers are not the Power BI team.
Yep.
And I think, and you could probably attest to this. You've probably done some consulting with companies, and I think, well, the report designers are the team. And there's so many missing pieces because people don't interconnect. They don't understand the data because they don't know who the data owner is. They don't know what the key metrics need to be. And then I think the worst possible experience a company can have when they implement Power BI is reports just start getting shot out. And I think people's first response is, why do I have to go and look at something else? Because you haven't really explained what we're doing, how it's going to help you do your job better. And this is not an additional thing to look at. We can take 5 or 6 things you're looking at and combine them into one place for you. So it's a group effort, really.
Oh yeah, and I mean, as from a designer's perspective, as many reports as you can build, the first version that you deliver to the users will never be the optimal version. It has to come through rounds of feedback to figure out what their needs and use cases are for that.
Correct. And so like I said, there's just no buy-in. And one of the things we'll talk about is training that needs to happen within Power BI. Obviously, a report author needs to be trained. They need to know how DAX works in Power Query. But I advocate training users because the Power BI service is fairly intuitive in some cases, but in other cases, it's mystifying until you show people how to use it. Once you show them, it's like, oh yeah, I get that. But they're not going to intuit how that thing works. So, I think maybe what we want to do first is kind of say, who is the Power BI team? And I think the answers might surprise some people. So I'm going to just pull this up and then we can start discussing it. So, I think the key is end users are part of the team. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And my main point there is the reports are built for end users. They need to know what they want. But if they don't have any idea how Power BI works, how are they going to ask for what they need?
Yep.
They have Excel in their mind, which is fine. That's what they use. Power BI is so much more than Excel and can do so much more. It can't replace Excel. Excel has its purpose, but it does so much more. And when you're building reports, knowing how that works is so much better than a Power BI report that's essentially just a data dump. Here's a big table with 10,000 records. Have at it.
Agreed.
So,
I mean, it's the art of possible, right? Like, they don't know what to ask for if they don't know what to ask for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you. So exactly,
yeah,
it is the art of possible. Exactly. So, I think first of all, before we dig in, I think we should all have a common framework of what is Power BI. And it is not just, Power BI desktop. It involves your data sources. That's all part of Power BI. And who owns data sources? You've got database administrators, you've got outside companies. A lot of people download their data from places like Amazon.com, Shopify, things of that nature. So it's all of your data. Obviously, content authoring is a big part of it and probably the most visible part because this is where the reports are. But then you have to understand how the service works. And then a huge part that people unfortunately tend to ignore is administration and governance. You ignore that at your own peril because somebody's going to publish a report to the web. And that could be minimally embarrassing, possibly a legal issue, depending on what that data is. So it has to be this entire process of let's make sure that we get with our legal department, our management team, make sure we're doing it right. So, data sources, obviously, a lot of people that are watching will see this, but we'll just go through a couple. It's obviously it's your data. It can be on premises. And if it's on premises, that means you get to have fun with installing the Power BI gateways, which can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But then it may be data in the cloud. Yeah. So you've installed gateways and troubleshoot gateways, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like doing a training. I was doing a training a couple of months ago, and my query was working in the desktop, not in the service. So, a little bit of panic there. Like, okay, how do we fix this in the training live? And I'm like, folks, this is real life. This is what you have to deal with Gateway sometimes. So, but you have, data. The more data you can put in the cloud, I think the better. I think it makes your life easier.
Hmm.
Because you don't have a gateway. You just connect to Salesforce, you connect to Azure SQL, Azure Storage Blob, whatever, and it just works. But if you have a gateway, then that's fine too. Most of my reports are a combination of gateway and cloud.
Yep, I'd say like that the less and less on premises, but like you said, it just everything becomes easier the more you use cloud-based storage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And then, obviously we have the content authoring tools. So Power BI Desktop is critical, but I think if you want to have a really robust organization that can do the advanced analytics and really get things going, beyond that first level, you need to have additional tools. And there's a lot of third-party tools out there, and Reed, about so many of these. But Tabular Editor is a key tool. DAX Studio. If you're going to be doing paginated reports, then you need that. ALM Toolkit when you start getting large data sources. But there's so many others. And, I've been using DAX Studio for a couple of years. And over the last 6 months, I have completely fallen in love with Tabular Editor. So it's such a boost. And what are some of the tools that you use in addition? I know you use those as well, but what kind of tools are you using?
These primarily, there's I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's like a performance analyzer that just came out recently that actually like
Hmm.
reconstructs your report and shows what every visual takes as far as load time and everything else. I'm spacing on the name of it. I'll drop the link into the chat.
I
But
think it is Performance Analyzer. I think that's what it's called.
yeah, well, because the performance analyzer is the built-in feature, but it takes the performance
Yeah.
analyzer data and then basically connects to a Power BI file, takes that, extrapolates it, and it's a really cool tool. So I'll drop the link in for people here in a minute. But that's probably the
Yeah.
latest one that I've added. In general, for people just wanting to know what to install, business ops that Power BI Tips makes. Thank you.
Hmm.
It's Report Analyzer by Michael Kowalski. And I actually emailed him, and he's interested in coming on to one of these streams. So hopefully in late December, early January, I'll have him on actually demoing that. But yeah, just to summarize for external tools, the Business Ops tool, which is an installer of installers, it is a tool that has a list of quite a lot of external tools out there, and that allows you to install a ton of them for this, including Power BI side tools, which just recently released DAX templates. So like there's some really cool new stuff for that. But I'll as you keep going, I'll drop a few links in the chat for people.
Okay. Yeah. And so the point is, Power BI Desktop is a great tool. I love it, but it only does what it does. And there's so much beyond that. And so you need these outside tools to really help with that analysis. So it's important that you allow your users, the ability to install these tools so they can do their job more effectively. The Power BI service is, fairly simple. It's where all the content is published to or authored in the service. I don't recommend a lot of authoring in the service. I don't know how you feel about building reports in the service. I've done it like 2 or 3 times, and every time I'm like, nah, I'm going back to the Power BI Desktop.
Yeah, I generally just don't do it that often.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an emergency situation. If cause I've never not brought my laptop, but if I can imagine a scenario you're on vacation and you don't have your computer with you and you need to make an edit for some reason, the service allows you to at least do it from any computer with a browser that has login abilities. But other than
Right.
that, it's really it's just not a best practice scenario at all versus desktop. It just
No,
has more features.
I agree. I agree completely. There are some things you have to do in the service. Dashboards are a
Hmm.
service only product, which is fine, and they absolutely have a use. You have 5 or 6 reports you have to look at, but there's only, there's 50 visuals across those reports, but there's 3 visuals you really care about every day.
Yep.
Put those 3 visuals on a dashboard, look at them every day, drill through and look at your other reports once a week or, whatever frequency you need to. So, dashboards kind of get a bad name. I think they should be called pin boards because they're a little bit different, but
Yeah.
they absolutely have a purpose, and I use them. And then data flows, that's something you author in the service. And then, of course, paginated reports you publish in the service. Distribution methods, to get everything out. I think the web browser is far and away the number one tool to get reports out to users. That's what they use. But there's other ways. They can get it through their devices. I'll tell you, I don't know how many clients you've been dealing with, Reed, that are using Microsoft Teams now for distribution. But it's really impressive how Microsoft has built that in.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So I think they're going to push it out automatically in November, and they're giving admins kind of a buffer here to say, if you want to turn this off, you can. Otherwise, come mid-November, it's going to be a hard-coded button on the left-hand panel of Teams. And I think it's a great way to do it because users are already in Teams. I don't think Teams is a product for Microsoft. I think it's a platform. They're just building so much on top of it. It's more than just a chat client.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to be their, kind of like Slack, a one-stop shop for a lot of different plugins for the Microsoft stack to be able to have that as kind of a almost like a content portal, both for files, and everything else, all being ran in the back end with basically like the ability to connect to, quote unquote SharePoint sites and stuff like that. Yep,
exactly. So let's, and then of course, custom applications. You may work for a larger organization when you're developing some, code and you're installing it. You can embed Power BI right in there. So there's many ways to do it. Let's take a look at the team itself, which is kind of the point of the, of the whole discussion here. There's two kind of roles. There are Power BI roles, and we'll just list them out very quickly here. The Power BI champion. I have report author and dataset author split. That may or may not be the case depending upon the size of your company or the size of the report. But I make sure users are key to that that group because they are important. Because they're the ones asking what do we need, and this is why Power BI exists. It's not for geeks to play with, it's for users to get the end data they need. But I think what's important is the organizational roles, and I think this is where people tend to overlook what's going on. You have the domain owner, data steward, and data analyst, and we're going to take a look at these, what each one is, because these are important people on the Power BI team that may never do anything with Power BI except go and look at the reports, but they're still a critical part of the team. And then if you're implementing, you may have a project leader. That would be a temporary piece of that during the implementation phase. But let's take a look at the data or the domain owner. And this would be someone that owns a critical set of data. Typically, it could be somebody in the C-suite, so it's your CFO, your chief marketing officer, but it could also be a smaller segment of your organization, a plant manager. They would know everything there is to know about their facility. And these are the people that you publish a report, they can look at it, and in 10 seconds, they can tell you whether or not your numbers are right, because this stuff's just in their head. And so these are a key reason why you're building the reports, and having them as part of the input on what do you need to see is critical. And it's not just, these are people you're delivering reports to. They're the reason, they're there, and you need to talk to them about understanding the data, right?
Agreed.
That's the biggest thing I found as a consultant is I have to go to these people and I say, look, I don't know your data. I know the formulas, I know the math, I know the computer. Explain the data to me so I can turn that data back to you in a meaningful way.
I often phrase it as questions of what questions are you trying to answer with this data? What decisions are you trying to make? Because like if you just tell me what's the best chart for this, I don't know. What story are you trying to tell with this? Like as you said, I don't know your data. I know based off of the story that needs to be told how this should be displayed and represented, and I know the math for it, but I need you to explain to me what meaning does this have for you in your organization? Like that's, you need to be the Rosetta Stone for me to be able to like give you an effective report.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, so reporting, typically reporting to the data steward, or I'm sorry, the data owner, or at least working very closely with them would be the data steward. And this is the person that, data is coming in from multiple sources. It could be your ERP system, Shopify data, or Amazon data, Salesforce data, whatever. This person's making sure that the data is kept at the right level of granularity. It has the right quality. You know how the fields match up. And you've got to talk to this person because it's very easy to join tables incorrectly from different systems. And obviously, you're going to get wrong results. And you want to make sure you're reporting data back at that right granularity. And they will help you determine, yes, your totals are right, they're wrong, kind of those checks in the background. So it's, again, somebody you need to work closely with. And then finally, the last organizational role would be the data analyst. And this person has a really deep understanding of the data. They may or may not be a developer. They could be a report developer, actually. But if not, they're using other tools. And one of the examples I use, if you've ever worked with the company that Nielsen tracks, they're the same company that did the TV ratings, but they also track how much makeup is sold and what toys are sold and what drinks are sold. They sell a tremendous amount of data to organizations, and they have their own entire platform of data analytics. You pull that stuff in, you combine it with your sales data. So you've got somebody analyzing that type of marketing data. They know what those key metrics are.
Yeah.
Work with them to determine, okay, how does this match up with our sales data? So we can see, what marketing trends are. So you can see when you have a coupon drop or a marketing promotion or a web promotion, how is that affecting it? And what are the important metrics? I'm just writing formulas. Anything can be important to me, but that may not be what's important to the organization. So the data analyst is a critical piece of the team.
Agreed.
This next person is my favorite person because I think I am this person. I think you are this person. The Power BI champion. So this is the person that really loves Power BI, and these are the people that, they're looking at the blog, they're installing the latest version, they're going to the preview section of Power BI Desktop and turning features on. Their enthusiasm is going to be infectious for the product. And in fact, sometimes I kind of joke, you have to rein them in sometimes because they're like doing stuff. It's like, that's so far in preview. We need to pull that back. We don't want reports using that feature with, publishing that to the CEO, but they're the ones that help drive adoption within the organization. And I think they're successful to a key to a successful adoption. And you don't hire them. You find them, they bubble up. So, and then next, these two I'm going to look at kind of together, the report author, and we're going to look at the data set author. But these are some skills that we can look at for each one of them. A report author. So the reason I say we may want to split these into two roles, you have a large organization, the data set could be much more complex. And you might have 4 or 5 reports written on top of that. So you can kind of co-work with both of these. I'm getting some music. Are you hearing that?
Yeah, it's part of the background that comes through the stream.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. It's okay. You can split that data set authoring with report and get more work done, but you have specialists involved in getting the data set done. So if you're basically doing reports, intermediate Power Query, intermediate DAX skills, basic data modeling skills. You have to know what a SAR schema is, but excellent visualization skills. And, Rita, I'm going to bow to you on this because your visualization skills are so far ahead of mine, but you understand this storytelling with data and how that works. So, some of the key things that you do when you're doing visualization. How are you communicating that with these other team members, like the data owner, things of that nature?
A lot of that is just education, and I mean, like, there's that tried and true, flow chart that kind of is like, what information are you trying to convey? There's also that Power BI reference chart that SQL BI makes that kind of, are you doing comparisons between or this? So I kind of help break down the idea of look at the data by it's two things. What is the type of comparison or data that I'm trying to display over what? And what is the story that I'm trying to tell with it? And usually answering those kind of helps you almost basically follow a flow chart of like the types of visuals that will support conveying an accurate way to tell that information. So there's usually some like handoff of skills when it comes to picking the right visual, so to speak, that delivers an effective story.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then I think something else that report authors should have to have, and it's kind of overlooked or not given enough emphasis, is communication skills. And the example I always give, and you've probably done the very same thing. Somebody has an Excel file or something that they're doing that takes 3 or 4 hours a week. They're getting
Mm-hmm.
5 different files from this place and a table, and they're doing VLOOKUPs and copy paste, and then they're done. And then they start over next Friday and they do the same report. And they're like, can you help me automate this, put it in Power BI?
Yeah.
Great. You do that. And then you go back 2 weeks later and you're like, hey, how's that report working? They're like, oh, it's awesome because now I can export the data and do these 4 other things with it. And you're like, wait a minute. You sit down and talk to them and you find out what you gave them was step 4 of an 8-step process. So
Exactly.
a good report author should say, wait a minute, what do you want to use this for? And then you find out what it is. It's part of this big chain of things. And you're like, let's try to do all 8 of them. And maybe you can, maybe you can't, but I bet you can get 95% of it done. And then it really cuts down. So I think communication skills are critical because if you just give people what they ask for, what was the term that you used? It's not lack of imagination. It was, I forget the term you use, but they don't know what they don't know. So they don't even know
It's
they
the
can
art of
ask for
possible.
yeah, it's the art of possible. They don't
Yes.
know what's possible.
Yep.
So help them understand that, and that's communication skills.
There was a good
So on the
question.
flip,
I was going to say
yeah,
just with related to report authors. Andrew had a comment on like where kind of with authoring, where does security fit in? I guess with any of these roles, I'm assuming you'd probably say that would be with the author. But yeah, he has like his friend has 4 different teams in the org trying to set data access policies, and then. Oh, it looks like it did cut it off a little bit, but I would say, but they don't seem to respect or trust each other. That's how the sentence finishes.
well, so I think the report author, it depends on what you're talking about when you're talking about security. If you've got a report and you want to do security roles, yes, absolutely, that's the author. They're creating the roles, role level security, possibly object level security. But I think it goes much deeper than that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. That's when you get into administration and governance, where you start setting security restrictions in the service itself, and it goes beyond what can be done in Power BI Desktop. So again, it's part of the entire team, and it's part of that process. So it depends on what the security level, where it is in the process, right?
Yep, fair, very fair.
Okay. So on the other side of report authors, you kind of have the co-conspirator here, data set authors. And these individuals are, they're next level in Power Query, or they're doing SQL Server. They're creating views or Oracle or whatever your database is. Great. If you want to push the data transformations back beyond, and I've got ETL here, that's extract, transform, and load. That's what Power Query is good at. But you can do your ETL in back-end systems. And the further back you can push it and automate it, the better. That's fine. They're doing advanced DAX. They have excellent data modeling skills. I would say they have basic visualization skills. Okay, they don't need to be great storytellers, but they need to know how the data needs to be modeled and what measures need to be done that will fit in with a line chart, a bar chart, or whatever that story is that needs to be told. And so they're going to work with the report author. What kind of measures are you needing here to make this work? So, and let's talk a little bit about data modeling. Super quick. We've all seen the Franken table, right? So this is just everything
Yeah.
in one place, and this is how we used to live in Excel, right? Everything was one place, and you can create great pivot tables in Excel. Then Power Pivot came along and changed all that for us. But this is completely inefficient, and we've seen great videos from people like the SQL BI team has shown put everything in one big table and let me just show you how slow your model is going to run and how hard it is to actually build a good report. So this is not good for Power BI. On the flip side, you have the Snowflake schema, and this is your database people. They're doing this stuff in SQL or Oracle or whatever. And you know what? It's great for SQL because you're doing add, change, delete. It's third normal form is the correct term, and you want to make sure everything is split properly. This is also not good for Power BI. That's not what it was designed for. And so we've all seen this. It's a Snowflake, a star schema. And this is what Power BI is designed for. And I recently had a conversation with someone on Twitter. You either design your database to be a star schema, or it's going to run slower and your DAX is going to be much more complex. And I don't know how many times you've developed a report read, but I've done it a tons of times. I get my data in, I think it's okay. And then I start building my DAX and I'm like, oh my gosh, this DAX is ridiculous. And I go back and I don't fix the DAX. I fix the data model. And then my DAX starts becoming easier and more performant. So
It takes there's a fine line, and I think a special skill to be able to eventually identify, wait, is this a modeling issue or a DAX issue? In general, though, the rule of thumb is I say DAX shouldn't shape your data at all. If you're having to do a lot of stuff to like filter or transform your data or dedupe or other stuff like that in the measure, consider that a question like, wait, is this something that I need in the model, or am I removing a data issue that does need to exist in the model in the first place? That's usually the recommendation that I try to like nudge people towards. But there's often not necessarily a right answer, because it very often can be done in both. Like it could be in a DAX, it can be done with modeling, it can be done in Power Query. So it just takes time to kind of learn your own best practices of where you should apply those changes.
yeah, I think there's no question there is a lot of art to this. I know there's some science. Obviously, you have to know the formulas and how it works, but there's a little bit of an art to getting a good star schema working. And there's many times I'll be halfway through a report and I'm like, I'm going back to the model and I'm going to rip this table out and I'm going to redo these two tables, and then I'll go back and I'll fix my DAX and things will be better. So yeah, I don't think there is a right way. I think there are better ways depending on the model. So absolutely.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit. So if you've got a Power BI team and they need to understand how DAX works, you as a manager need to understand it doesn't work like Excel. So if we go back to our report authors and data set authors and you look at their DAX skills, there's a couple of concepts in Power BI that are just critical to understand. So if we just take a look at DAX, which is data analysis expressions, it is a functional language. I think a problem with DAX is it has some functions that look very Excel-like, but underneath they are very, very different in how they work, or why they work the way they work. And this is because of something in DAX or in Power BI called evaluation context. And this blew me away several years ago when I started using Power Pivot, because I knew how to write really long and complex Excel formulas. But once I figured out I could write very simple DAX formulas and let the evaluation context change my numbers, things just started getting, it was almost magical. So if we look at the two parts of evaluation context, there's row context, and these are rows in a table, not a table visual, but the actual underlying table. We're going to take a look at this briefly just to kind of explain what it is. And then the filter context, and that's what comes from the visuals, and that's kind of where the magic starts happening. You start putting a bar chart with an axis and things of that nature, and things just automatically start happening. So let's look at the row context. And here on the screen, we have a simple table. This is a sales table in the background. You have it?
There we go. Yep.
Okay.
Well, the one thing that I like about some of the new features that I have is I can move the video around as necessary if there's something on one side of the screen.
Sure. So this is a table, and if you look at the formula at the top of the screen, it just says unit price minus unit cost. That is a very Excel-like function. Yep. And you could create a column in a table. I've done that here. I've created a margin column, and so it's, that first row was $1,299 minus the cost of $430. That's my $868. Great. Now I have a margin. So it's very simple to do. It gives you the correct results. And this is not efficient at all. You do not want to be treating the table view as an Excel file, because that's not what it is. It bloats the model. It doesn't compress as well. It slows the refresh. If you have premium capacity, it will take up capacity as it's doing the refresh and doing that final day load, because then it has to calculate all this stuff. On 1,000 rows, who cares? You have a model with 100 million rows, this becomes a real hassle. But you still have to know how row context works. Because if we go to the next part of evaluation context, we get into filter context. And again, they come from many places in the report. So we could have rows and columns in a visual. That gives you your context. The axis or the legend of a visual, that changes the numbers. Filters and slicers. And so we have this visual. So this is a simple matrix visual that has a couple of slicers. And if you look at the formula, it's a very simple formula. It says sales quantity. Well, how am I getting that 339,000 units? Well, this is the Contoso model. We've all seen this, or a lot of us have played with it. And I think this model has about 12 million records.
Yep.
So the first thing the model does is say, hey, okay, it's the year 2009. Now we're down to 4 million records. And then it says the brand is Contoso. Now we're down to 1 million records. Then we get 3 colors from our model and 3 countries. And finally, it boils it all down and says, you know what? That's going to be a few set of records, and it's 339,000 units. But then it recalculates that measure 50 more times for this visual and gives us every single number. And it's a very simple formula. And if you've ever worked in Excel, this would be a really complex formula. You have, relative versus absolute references, and you're trying to do these X lookups, and it can be very complex.
Yep.
Power BI does this so fast and so simply if you understand how it works.
Broke up just a little bit. Your audio is still crystal clear. Now your video is fine again. Okay. I think there was just a small hiccup, but I think we're good now.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually had a question that popped up. I think I'll bring this up in a second, but back to your topic earlier on, like, there's sometimes like, do I have a measure or a column? Like, and I think that was your thing about creating the margin. And for that one, and it's actually a sneak peek on a live stream that I'm going to be doing soon with Ruth, where the topic of the entire live stream is just going to be, it depends. We're going to talk about scenarios where it depends. But I would say that is one of those where for models where the DAX is fairly clean and you are just doing like a pretty straightforward calculation against like a SumX against, units times price. Yes, you'll save a lot of file size against a 100 million row table. But the times where the DAX, even with the most optimized model, let's say you have like a 30, 40 plus enterprise level thing that has a lot of layered calculations. Unfortunately, there's switch statements that have to be in there, just a ton of logic that has to go into the DAX. Those are the actual times where I actually might bloat the model a bit, because having to do a SumX and then having that be iterated through all these other measures will end up just causing like 5-10 second measures. So there are occasionally times where bloat is still okay, because that means that at least the slicer selection is, and I think Rob was the one who taught me this years ago, it's like 3 seconds is how long a slicer selection should take. If anything more than that, it becomes a burden on the end user. Anything 3 seconds or less, it becomes noise. They just don't really notice it. And yeah, that's what I try to go for at the end of the day is model size is important. but it really is the experience for the user. That's the number one thing that should be delivered, aimed towards, is a quick and efficient user experience, whether or not that is a bigger model or more complex measures, or some mix of the two of them.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I always go for the measure first. I may build it in calculated columns as I'm building my logic, but then I'll collapse it all and put it back into a measure when I'm done. But I was working on a report, I don't know, 15 million records, not the hugest thing in the world, but it was using the percentile inc function. And that is an incredibly inefficient function. It is horrible. And so this thing was taking like 5 or 10 seconds for visuals to refresh. And I'm like, you know what? I pre-calculated it in the calculated column, and now I'm down to like 50 to 60 millisecond visuals.
Yep.
So as always, it depends, right? So there are times where pre-calculated values can help your DAX, your performance. Absolutely. It's never either or.
Last thing that I'll mention too, the DAX calculated columns was the first way ever in a tabular model to add calculated columns. We've since added Power Query. The only times that I would say that in this case, if you're doing margin, that should be something done in Power Query, because it will go through a better compression when it comes into the model. There is still some that happens with DAX, but the whole process of compressing the data upon import happens better when it's done in the pipeline of Power Query. The only times really you should do a DAX calculated column is when you need to do something that requires an aggregation against the data in some way that needs to be referenced back to that, because Power Query just doesn't do that as well. It requires a bunch of subqueries and other stuff that just usually takes more steps when you're trying to return a number into that cell. But as like a little quick tip as well. But I actually did want to get to a question on, let's see if it can answer this, from Alexander on how would you handle hierarchical dimensions packed into a single table?
Well, so to me, I'm not sure I completely understand the depth of the question, but to me that would be in your dimension tables. And so you're going to have a one-to-many relationship back to your fact table, but you could still report off of any of those hierarchies within the dimension table. And they should all be packed into a single table.
Agreed.
In your dimension tables, you're going to have highly repetitive information instead of it being snowflaked out. But that's how Power BI is designed. That's how the SQL Server analysis engine underneath is designed. To have those dimensions in one table, it's better than having like category, subcategory, and region and all that stuff. Don't put that in 4 different tables. Collapse all that into your product table.
James, for some reason, actually, it looks like I need to fix the images and the names. They're not coming through. But James actually had a great response that summarized: merge the queries, keep the relationships between the fact table and the lowest level of the granularity. Essentially, it's just to give a best practice summary of that. The Power BI tabular works better with star versus snowflake. The closer to a star schema you can get, the better. The more jumps it has to make across tables, and there's a bunch of SQL BI articles on this, the slower it gets. So instead of having fact to product subcategory or category, you should have like a product master table or anything like that. So you really want to collapse and normalize. And I think SQL BI actually just did a great article on header detail and collapsing that in to help to create star schema scenarios. But that really is, at the end of the day, you want as few links between your data and whatever dimensions that you have that are going out from there.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing for database people to understand. Just like the hardest thing as an Excel user, it was hard for me to understand to break the table out into multiple tables. It's hard to get SQL people and database people to understand, collapse those into single tables, at least for your dimensions and whatever, to create that star schema, because they're always thinking of, like I said, that third normal form where you've got your dimension tables in a Snowflake are very small and non-repetitive. And so it's hard to say, no, you want that data to repeat in there. Get those categories and subcategories and everything in there. So very difficult to unlearn. We all have to unlearn some things to get it to work right in a new product.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the filter context here. Let's now combine that with row context without using a calculated column like we did earlier. So now we have this table, or I'm sorry, this visual. So now I'm calculating gross sales, but I don't have a sales number in my fact table. I don't have unit times price. I just have unit and price as separate fields.
Mm-hmm.
I am using SumX. So SumX is one of the X functions. So there's SumX, average X, concatenate X, count X, a few others. These are iterators. These create row context. So it's going through the data, quantity times price, 12 million times. Then it applies the filter context and gives me my $29 million figure for Contoso 2009. And so a Power BI developer has to understand this. And this is, I don't think you can just intuit this. I don't think you can play with the model and figure this out. I think this is something you have to study. I think you have to read it, watch a video about it. You have to be taught it and you have to practice it. I don't think it's like just figuring out how a VLOOKUP works.
So, like, I don't know. Do you have a personal favorite for DAX? Honestly, I really like Brian Grant's stuff that he's produced. He does a really good job, I think, of it. I always think of the Star Trek analogy, like big complicated term, and it's like overinflating a balloon. They were really good on doing that on the TV show, providing those like complex and then simple analogy. And I found that his content does that really, really well. Plus a lot of really cool interactive, like crazy magic Excel workbooks and other stuff where you like change a value here, you watch all these other values cascade. It visually just shows you the filter and the row context and all that. But like you said, this isn't something that for the most part you can't self-learn. Like you can get so far, but eventually you need structured training that really helps break down the filters are the number one most important thing. That's what DAX is powerful with, is filtering. And you need to know how the visual translates to filter context, how you can go from visual to row context and the context transition, and all of that really can only truly, I think, come through some type of structured in-person or online training.
Yeah, and I think if you're using that, that's great. Obviously, I think SQL BI has some really good courses. Theirs tend to be more advanced. If you want a book, my favorite book for getting started with Power BI, Matt Allington has a great book, Supercharged Power BI.
Yep.
And it starts at such a basic level, and he just keeps hammering over and over and over with examples. And it just really, as you go through, it really becomes clear. So it depends on what you're doing. Is it video that you want? Is it an in-person course? You know, P3 does in-person training, or, well, we're doing virtual now, but we'll get back to in-person at some point. Those are awesome. But if you want a book, I think Matt Allington's book is phenomenal.
And there's
a number of books out there.
It was recently updated too.
I think version 3.
Yep.
It's been around for years, and he just keeps adding the newest stuff.
He's another author. I mean, Rob hasn't updated his book for a few years now, but I think they're both really good at being approachable for people like getting started and still deep diving, but in a way that it's not SQL BI. That is something that no, you need to work with DAX for at least a year and have that as part of your full-time job before I would even recommend you start reading those books, outside of maybe looking up a few patterns to copy out of there, because it's going to go immediately over your head. But it's very approachable for somebody who's been using Power BI for a month. You can the supercharged Power BI, you can drop into it, and you're going to understand 80+% of it very easily.
Yeah, and like you said, Rob and Avi have written a book, fantastic, on Power BI. It was the book. It was the first book, and it was the first book that I read. And in fact, it was such a popular concept of what they went through. The way I arrange tables in the model is, I call it the Rob Colley method, because I put my dimensions across the top, facts across the bottom, and the filters run downhill. And it makes it easy. So it's a star schema, but I organize it differently. And I know when I walk into a client and I see that they're doing it the same way, I'm like, okay, we're going to have a good conversation because they understand how this works. And it's not just, Post-it notes thrown on the floor that are all connected. So, So that's, filter context, the number one thing to learn. Not the only thing to learn, or evaluation context rather, but it's the number one thing to learn. You've got to have that.
That puts you in intermediate category. If you
Yep.
understand a base level of how filters are applied and the types of filters, I would say that elevates you to be an intermediate DAX user at that point.
Hmm. Yep. So Power Query, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm not going to start firing up M code, even though I would love to do that. I could talk about M code for hours. But Power Query is how you get your data in. And I think the mistake a lot of people new to Power BI make, and unfortunately, I think Microsoft fosters this mistake, is they connect to a bunch of things and they hit that yellow load button. And that's going to give you a mess because data is not pre-organized in the right way. It's not at the right granularity, and it is absolutely not at a SAR schema level. So you want to learn how to use Power Query to get your data in the right place. If you're doing a data set, you need anywhere from minimal skills if it's coming from database tables, because those are generally in pretty good format. You may need to do some merges, but you're not going to be doing a lot of transformations and cleanup. But other data sources, you might have to be an absolute Power Query ninja to get this to work. If you look at this, maybe this is your data source. It's an Excel file that's coming from the finance department. You're going to have to figure out how to get these dates into a column.
Yep.
This is human readable. This is not machine readable. You pull this into Power BI and it's a mess, because what's your total sales? You're going to have to add up 12 columns to do that. So you're going to have to learn how Power Query works and get rid of the blank rows, get rid of the totals, transpose the data. And this is not a huge thing to fix. Let's look at this though. You get this kind of thing. You're getting this from a vendor or a supplier, and you got to pull these kind of things into a report. A Power Query wizard is going to have to spend some time figuring out, okay, how do I do this? Because you're not given access to those data sources. So
No.
you're going to have to figure out, where's my account number? Where's the amount? What are the column headings? This is going to take some time.
You basically have to find the patterns. What's the repeatable patterns between these? Thankfully with Power Query, removing blanks is a very powerful way to that on this column, if I collapse the blanks, it's always going to normalize this. But essentially the issue is you're taking a report and you're transforming it back to data. Data was formatted as a report, now formatted back to data. And a lot of these people they don't have access to the core system because it's a CRM system or something else where they protect their data under a lock and key unless you pay extra money to access it. So you have to consume this, and God forbid it's consumable in a PDF form, which thankfully there's a connector in Power BI, but I've had to build things where I'm grabbing PDFs from a folder in something like this that has to be converted back into data into a report. And it's I wouldn't say it's painless, but at least it's easier today than it used to be before there was a PDF connector.
Yeah, but it's still the worst. PDFs are the worst. The tables aren't even consistent sometimes between reports.
Between invoices or things, for sure. Yeah, the pattern maybe works for 90% of them, but you still have to manually fudge some of the other data because it's on row 8 instead of row 7, even though they look the same. It's just identifying a separate row in that PDF for this one instance or something.
Yeah, can be very frustrating. Yeah, I feel for anybody that's developing Power BI reports off of PDF files. It's doable, but man, you've got to be patient.
It would be nice if you could charge a rate that's consistent with how painful this hour of work is. Not all hours are equal. Sometimes this 1 hour of work is 5 times more painful to do than the other hours, but there's flat rates for consultants at least.
Exactly. SQL's here, Excel files, SharePoint lists, and then finally, PDF files are the worst.
Whew, yeah.
So,
yep.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit, we're going to hit one third-party tool, not to call it out for any particular reason, but just to help understand the importance of why you should allow your employees to install these third-party tools. Get with your IT department, run the virus scans, etc. But these third-party tools are really necessary when developing with Power BI Desktop, because it doesn't do everything, and it doesn't do everything by design. It's not meant to be the end-all be-all tool. Microsoft relies on third parties, which is why for over a year now we've had an external button in Power BI itself. Launch Tabular Editor, DAX Studio, and 30 other tools right from within Power BI. So And please, everybody, don't criticize my DAX here because I just did this as an example. But I need a measure that's going to return the average sale for all red products sold in 2009. This measure will return that value. You can see it at the bottom of the screen, $182. But if you can imagine trying to write this in Power BI desktop and figuring out, okay, what is the red sales table at the top returning and what is the count rows returning and all that, it becomes a nightmare. DAX Studio allows you to very quickly see, here's a preview of the table at the bottom. I can see it's 300,000 rows for that table. I can push a button and shoot that right out to Excel or a CSV file if I want to do other analysis with it. And so this is just one of many things that DAX Studio can do for your users. And it's really disheartening for me to talk to people and say, well, if you did this in DAX Studio, you could do X, Y, and Z and see how that works. And they say, well, my company won't let me install any third-party tools. And, you know, I've been at companies that do that.
There is at least a self-contained version of DAX Studio that runs without needing to install that Darren does make, which is really nice. Like I very much applaud him for building that version for people who have a locked system that won't install third-party tools.
So you can download that, or it has to go on a USB key, or how?
You should be able to download that directly from the site. There's two options for like the EXE or like the self-contained one. I believe just on the main page. I'll double check now, but he built that for people who can't install that. Unfortunately, Tabular Editor has to actually be installed in the system. There's no self-contained version of that, and I don't think he's working on it. But at least with DAX Studio, thankfully, that there's a blessing for that one workaround for those locked up laptops where IT has to spend 6 months to go through a backlog to then vet it.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, you definitely, once you get past the beginning stages of Power BI, you've got to have DAX Studio, and I think Tabular Editor, and more of these tools. I've used a tool, Power BI Helper, trying to figure out what columns are being used and where they're being used, and you're trying to troubleshoot. That's very, very difficult to do in Power BI Desktop itself. So many great tools out there. Mm-hmm. And then the last user, we've talked a lot about the report authors and the data set authors because those are the most visible. But your Power BI users themselves this is why we have Power BI. And all users need to be trained. And if we look at the features of Power BI, how do drill through reports work? How do slicers work? How do you select multiple values in a slicer? That control click is not intuitive to everybody. I know it because that's how you do it in Excel, but not everybody knows that little trick. Filtering data using the filtering pane, drilling up and down hierarchies, category, subcategory, color, etc. You have to know how to do the hover over and get the little up arrow and the double down. What's the difference between the double down arrow and the wishbone arrow? Yeah. So it requires training. Finding their reports. They get links once in a while, but how do they go and find their reports? Using a Power BI app. Sharing a report with coworkers. This is critical. Finding reports shared with me. Most people, if you say, that report I shared with you last month, the first thing they're going to do is they're either going to go to Teams or email and spend an hour looking for the link. There's a button in the Power BI service called Shared with Me. You click on it, and everything is shared in order. It's not hard to use. You just need to know it's there. It's part of training.
It would be nice if you could organize that a bit, like create your own folders to bucket stuff inside of, do some custom organization of, because I've seen a few of those where in a large organization, there's a few hundred artifacts that are in that list at least of shared entities. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, like we said earlier, Teams is more and more of a platform. You can comment right on reports in Teams. Don't shoot people links and say, look at this. Just comment right on it in Teams. And without end user training, it's just going to fail. It's a tool for everyone. And then real quickly, because we had the question about security, let's look at the Power BI administrator. This is the person that's working with your management and legal team to ensure all the security settings are proper. Can you share it with the web in public, or do you have to restrict it, or do you block it entirely? And there's, we've seen this admin portal before, but there's about 50 or 60 settings and new settings every year. So you have to go through it and continually make sure the new features that are being added, you're doing what's right for your organization, because it is not one size fits all. And, the Power BI administrator, they may not do any DAX at all, but they have to know just about everything in your tenant and how it works. So my favorite phrase here is constrain creativity. You don't want things locked down so much that people are creating the shadow IT department, but you don't want it so loose that it's the Wild West, right? It's that middle ground. So, sharing, who can publish, what level do they have access to? Can they export at all? Is it summarized data, detailed data, etc.? And basically, what do they have to know about? Everything, a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And we've all seen this visual. This that Dustin Ryan has produced is phenomenal. You can get it at his website, SQL Dusty. But this is the entire Power BI ecosystem, and the Power BI administrator has to know a little bit about this entire process.
Out of curiosity, I haven't actually seen this one, but is there an animated version of this? I look at this and I immediately would just like, man, if these arrows actually like moved in the direction, like that would just be such a fun infographic animation.
No, I know he does this in Visio, so okay. I don't think there's any animation capabilities there. And you could probably animate it in PowerPoint, but I would rather pull data out of a PDF than try to animate in PowerPoint too much. It was enough to get it to do what I'm doing here. So the whole point of this is increasing adoption. It's making sure that everybody has access to the data. They know what's going on. And if you have users that are not trained, they're simply not going to use the service, and you're going to have a failed adoption. So
agreed.
That's the point. This end slide is the whole point of the whole discussion. Increasing adoption in your organization, making it successful.
One of my favorite, I'd say, reframes that I've had is I've stopped calling them users and I've started calling them consumers, because they a user can be a lot of different things, but like what are they doing? Like what is the action that they have? They're consuming it's artifacts either through dashboards, reports, etc. But they're consuming data and outputting hopefully a decision from it. And if you can't make a decision, then it's a very expensive paperweight that you built for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or worse, you're foisting something on them. They're like, why do I want this? I've already got 5 reports. I don't want a 6th one. And so it's helping them understand that this one can replace at least 3 of those others, maybe all of them.
Yep. Well, ideally, like the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. The simpler the report, the better. The less visuals, the better. As long as it conveys an effective story and allows for some decision to be organizational change to be made from it.
Right.
Yep.
All right. So, are there any questions from your audience?
Yeah, I had a couple kind of at the very beginning. Didn't know what quite where to insert it, but Christian had a really great question. Also fixed the card now. So, if end users still want to export to Excel, whose fault is it? Theirs, or is it yours, as you've not explained? I'll paraphrase the last part to say, like, because you didn't build the report well or explain to them well how to use said report.
Yeah, I mean, so again, it depends. There are reasons to export, but increasingly, I am showing people how to use the Analyze in Excel feature. If they truly need the data in Excel, build a pivot table in Excel, they open it up, they hit refresh, they're done. Otherwise, they're exporting, and then they're spending 3 hours doing VLOOKUPs and copy paste. That's helping no one.
Yeah, and very much so. Like the export copies out data that is stale the second it becomes into the model refreshes and the file doesn't anymore. So Analyze in Excel is a great feature. The one thing that I've been working on, for like the last year with the XViz people, now Lumo Visuals, is the Info River thing, which is basically Excel built into Power BI. That's another option. But there's so many ways to analyze the data in an Excel-like environment, however that is, with connected data that actually updates with the model. You know, as soon as you export, you lose that connection, and now any changes you make in that file, well, you're going to have to do that again the next time you export it the next week. The only time I've ever done that is usually during build processes where people need to like get the raw data dumped just so they can do a verification against the backend, and that's the only time I use the export option, honestly, most of the time.
Right. And I have built reports that are deliberate for export because they're taking that export and then they're uploading it into a separate system. Could be a third-party system that they don't have direct access to. But if we get a CSV for them, then that's the answer, right? And that's fine. So it's not never, but it's increasingly rare that you should just be exporting to Excel because they're just going to be doing VLOOKUPs and then it's a mess.
Exactly. A couple of other questions. I will say for anybody whose question I missed earlier, I'm dropping this question in now from Greg, but go ahead and re-ask any of the questions that I might have missed or any remaining questions you have. So, oh, there we go. Okay. How does Agile Scrum factor into a PBI team's success?
I've heard varying things on what I don't use those for Power BI, and I've heard varying successes. I've heard people say you shouldn't do it, and others it does. I don't know what your opinions are on that, Reed, but I think that may be more of a company culture versus trying to bring that in and say this is how we're going to do Power BI. If that's not the way the company works, I'm not sure that's going to be very successful.
It's 100% that. Like, I mean, if the company hasn't done it before, then it's probably not something you need to implement because now you're using Power BI. But if that's your process for implementing everything, there is a way to do Agile and Scrum management to deploy, in any versions of DevOps as well. But like, it's whatever your practices are for doing pushes and releases and phasing between and within a project. It's going to apply to Power BI just like it would any other arm. But that it really is it's not a Power BI question. It's a company culture question.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Let's see. I think I did have one earlier from Christian. I don't know if he's still on. I think I missed this one earlier. But considering people are more proficient in kind of one of the two, and this was in relation to the roles that you had earlier, would you recommend improving the weak area or having kind of separate groups? So I think it's kind of, I'm translating this to a bit of a consolidation of roles versus keeping them separate. I'm going to guess it's probably an it depends answer, but I'll let you provide some insight.
Yeah, so I think this is probably talking about report authors versus data set authors.
Yes.
And I think it just depends on the complexity of the report. But, at some point, if you have somebody that is just I think it's going to be the very rare individual that is just a complete data modeling wizard and can also do a really good looking report. Okay. I tend to be better at data modeling and have a lot of tables and matrices, right? So I'm an accountant. I don't have that great thing. So I would rather spend time on that. But I do reports and I can, but I don't think, I think there's always room for improvement. I've taken, in fact, I took your visualization class that you had on
Skillwave?
Skillwave, yes. I couldn't think of the name.
Awesome.
Thank you. So very good class, and I'm using your template because there's some very good ideas that it just never occurred to me how to do these things. So if you're on the accounting number crunching side, then I highly recommend this class, your class. But yeah, if you're a report author and you're like, okay, you know what, I'm great at visualization, but I can't get the measures to work. Yeah, improve yourself. But there's no reason to consolidate the roles. Do again what's best for the company. So, again, it depends. I hate to fall back on that, but that's the reality of the answer sometimes.
I completely agree. And I dropped the link down there for people interested just for the class that Ed was speaking about. I released it earlier this year, but it's basically an end-to-end kind of coverage of a lot of the report level features. So it's basically you have a completed data set. How can I make a report off of it? So that's kind of where I've put a lot of my specialty into. But you mentioned that it's pretty rare that people can do back end and front end. I'd like to consider myself somebody who doesn't manage to do a bit of both. I actually had somebody at a conference once call me a unicorn. I think I took that as a compliment because apparently it's a rare thing. But for the most part, focus on what you're good at. Like, if you are in an organization that's small enough that you have to play every role, you're kind of left with either A, requesting that you enlarge the team from your whoever your point of contact is in the organization, or B, you do have to learn that. But otherwise, no, like focus on the area that's going to help you most for your job, and that often is going to be the modeling or the reporting or the administration, or maybe a mix of the two of them. But you don't have to be too much of a jack of all trades. Like I think I've definitely had the stress paralysis before of like trying to specialize in everything. I made a decision years ago, like I know enough to be able to make a demo in Power Apps and Power Automate for clients. But if I actually need an enterprise level deployment for that, I have colleagues that I ask, other MVPs to do that. And I made a choice. I'm just not going to specialize in that because I don't have enough time to keep being an expert in Power BI and the stack there, and then also add this to my skill set versus just relying on other people. So it's very okay to like choose not to specialize in certain things that are related to your field, and make sure that you have a deeper understanding of the things that matter more to your job.
I completely agree, and I completely identify with what you said with Power Apps. I've delved into that, and I did more than stick my toes into it, and I'm developing some really cool stuff, and then I'm realizing I don't have the brain power to understand all the depth and clear collections and all of that work and the way to optimize, because you get into, we call it folding, they call it delegation. And I'm like, you know what? I pull back from it. I'm like, my brain can only handle two things, and that's going to be DAX and M, and that's it.
Okay.
I don't have time to get Power FX going. So yeah, there's no harm in, no shame in focusing.
Exactly. I think I had one more question that I'll pop up.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Nope, not this one. This one from Christopher. Now that I'm in a larger org, we have to think about version control and coding changes. Any good tools such as like GitHub or Azure DevOps that I'm assuming that he's asking that you use, or us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have not, and it's kind of funny. Microsoft falls back to, you want version control? SharePoint. You put it in SharePoint and it keeps versions of your PBIX files.
It works well enough for effortless implementation. For like very basic, it's fine.
Yes. I have seen people trying to use DevOps and work with Power BI in there. I have not dabbled in it myself. So I think you're kind of on your own because it's not something that Microsoft directly supports. I got to believe they're working on it though, because Power BI is more than just report writing now. And so you're developing products. So it's like coding an app, right? So, somewhere in the back of Microsoft offices, probably somebody tinkering around with concepts on how do we implement this. I don't think it's there yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I just dropped a link, actually. Steve Campbell was on my stream earlier on implementing version control, because he has a really cool tool that actually plugs into SharePoint, but talks about GitHub and a few other ones. So I dropped that into the chat. Still blows me away. He had the second highest viewers outside of Marco ever on my channel. We had like 160 people on the stream at the time when that went live. So
wow.
Yeah,
cool.
People really like version control apparently.
It's a thing, right?
Yep.
This is it's so much more than just an Excel file. So it's going to have to happen.
Agreed. And at least the ability to expose more elements of the Power BI file as well with the new schema that they've released in the last year or so also allows for a lot more features to, DevOps type abilities to break it apart. Tabular editor actually can disassemble and reassemble it. So there's definitely ways to do pseudo DevOps and version control and other stuff. It's not perfect. It still is somewhat of a single author experience, and better said, you can really do DevOps on the model. You can't really do DevOps on the report itself. Like the report features, like the visuals and everything else, there's no way to break that up. That stuff, nobody's managed to like disassemble and expose it, and the file's not really designed to split apart all that to allow somebody to like individually edit one visual while another's being worked on. So like that kind of still is a single author experience, unfortunately. Someday maybe that might change, but that's one of those that really doesn't have any easy way outside of you check in and check out a file, and hopefully just one person's building the report experience, because that really is because so much artistic input goes into that. It's kind of hard for a lot of chefs to be building that layer versus like an enterprise model where it makes sense to maybe update a single table or something in an 85 table model or something.
Exactly. But, I hope, last year when Microsoft introduced that, enhanced metadata format, allowing the tabular editor to write to it, I'm hoping that is stage one of a multi-stage process to open that file up to this kind of enhancement. And I think DevOps would definitely be part of that. Version control, multiple people working on the same file at the same time. I mean, we can do it in Excel, right? You can have 15 people in an Excel file. It's kind of amazing where we are now versus where we were just 5 years ago. So
it would be interesting if that ever came up someday where, like, just like an Excel file, you could see that. I would imagine, just again, given the metadata structure, that probably isn't something that we're going to see anytime soon. Maybe in theory someday, but like the complexity of the PBIX file is there's so many more layers to that versus like a Word document or anything else. So that ability of like opening up online and like seeing what visual somebody's highlighted, like Susan's working on this while you're doing that, like that. It's a nice pipe dream, but I can't imagine that anytime soon.
I think honestly, for that to happen, the PBIX file is not really a part of the equation. You publish your model to the service, and then the report authoring experience in the service is like radically enhanced. But you have one model.
Yeah,
that could conceivably work, and you could theoretically do that today, but you just have a very limited report writing experience in the service, so it doesn't make it realistic.
Exactly. Actually, I have one more question. Michael C., let's pop this up. How do you transition companies away from table matrices to visuals? It's a great question. So it basically is, how do I make a shift from Excel, people who are used to Excels and tables, into visuals? I, of course, have plenty of opinions on that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, because I'm an accountant, and so I like tables and matrix. You know, I often joke that my favorite three visuals are the matrix, and the matrix. But when you just have a data dump like that, that's not really helping. What are your important metrics? That gets back to what we talked about. Who's the data analyst or who's the data owner? What are those important metrics? That's what you put in a visual. Sales by category, that's a bar chart. That is not a table. Now, that doesn't mean 3 clicks later, you're in the table. That's fine. But tables don't belong on the front page of a report. So it's how do you identify what's important? Then how do you identify the visual that best represents it? It's not a pie chart. It's a bar chart. It's a line chart if it's something over time. Then let them drill down to the key thing. But that's how you get from a 15 million record database to the 500 records that are really important for you to analyze, and they're still summarized in total for you. So, but I'd love to hear your opinions because you're much better on the visualization side.
I show by example. I can tell them until the cows come home. Oh yeah, like you should have a summary page with trends and visuals, and like this should be detailed. But like until they see it, like it gets the art of possible. They need to see what is possible, and some kind of a concept, just even a basic one, like a 2-page, and then generally as a consultant, I have to mock this up for them anyways. By the time they've already hired me, they know things need to change. But just a simple concept from, here's an Excel report. Hey, if I need to buy in and I'm an employee at a company, can I get a half a day to build a mock-up of this, of what this might look like in Power BI? Have a summary page with the bars, the columns, the line charts, a few things that help to show the patterns, the trends, the information that at a summary level, what is my data doing, where am I going, and then have a drill through to like a detail page with row level detail or invoice level detail, just a basic concept of that, of a 2-page report from summary to detailed with drill through, usually is a great way to convey tables have meaning. Matrix tables are useful at a detail level when you've typically found information that you want to investigate and you're drilling down from a category or something to another page to then dig further into that section of data. Yep, exactly. I find that just, that often just shows better. Like it's the same thing with like, why shouldn't I use a pie chart? I will pop a pie chart. I will, and again, there's sometimes I use them. I don't completely ban them, but I'll pop a bar chart or a column chart right next to it. Okay, immediately looking at these two, which can you more easily identify how much larger category A is from B? And they're like, oh yeah, actually the bar chart's pretty easy to understand. Totally, like compared to these 18 cuts that is in this pie chart. So just showing by example, I found, because I'm a visual learner, and I visually show people usually when I'm trying to direct them to a better practice. I give them the bad practice next to the best practice and just show them
Yes.
side by side. And it's usually like, oh, this is clear as day. Yeah, it makes total sense why we should do this now.
Exactly. But as you and I both know, if the client wants a pie chart with 8 slices, okay, we'll make it look as good as we can.
And then it's like, all right, just when people ask, this is not a certified Havens Consulting report, but this is something that I did build for the, yeah. It's like, make sure my name is not attached to this now. But yeah, you're right. It's like, you can recommend as much as you want, but it's still their final decision. So,
Exactly.
you know, and they're signing the checks. Like, hey, if you want this, I will build this for you. Yep. Yeah. That is all you can do as an advisor, because that's what you are, is you are advising them on what they should do, and they sometimes still pull the trigger on another choice.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. I think we're out of questions, so we can probably wrap up here. This has been really great. I enjoy times when I get to hang out and have conversations. I learned a bunch of stuff as well. So I think, considering the chatter that we had in the comments, how many did we get today? We had. Can somebody drop one more comment? We're at 99 comments, and it would be nice to get an even 100. So one more comment gives us an even 100 comments in this list. So that would be a nice icing on the cake to finish it off. But otherwise, Ed, I appreciate you coming on. This has been really good conversations today. So
thanks for having me. It's been an honor to be here.
Oh, and perfect. Alex Powers dropped in, got 99 comments and a pie chart 8-1. So that was our 100th comment. Excellent.
Way to go, Alex. That's good. All right.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for tuning
much.
in. Yeah, next week is, actually, let me triple confirm. Just getting back into the groove of things. So next week will be, Gilbert is going to be talking on about actually migrating from Azure Analysis Services into Power BI Premium and the conversations around that. So that's going to be a good live stream as well. So tune in for that next week, and I'll be back on live streams for about another 4 weeks, and then I'm going to Peru again, so then I'll be gone for another 2 weeks after that. But I'm glad to be back and doing these again. They're a lot of fun for me on my Fridays. So.
All right. Awesome.
All right, Ed. Cheers. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.